welcome to this LCR Worldview seminar. We'll be looking at how an interest in art can support a global lifestyle. As we all know from vacations and travel, it's much more interesting when you have a purpose and a community that you can engage with. And we know from personal experience and from working with partners like the Cultivist that art can provide this, whether it's for a short visit as you're exploring a place, a country, or a community, or for a longer one. For example, completely relocating to a new country. My name is John Baker. I'm the CMO of LCR Capital, and today I will be the moderator of a conversation with Joey Lico, who is the executive director and one of the first employees of the Cultivist. Welcome, Joey.
Thank you, John and LCR and everyone for inviting me to participate in this discussion. I think you've already identified some amazing reasons why it's important to have these conversations. So thank you for having me.
So I'm going to actually use your tagline and jump in and say, we're looking forward to thinking about how art unlocks life and the Cultivist can unlock art. Those of you who have registered and joined, we know most of you are familiar with LCR. We are a firm that helps families or individuals that are interested in, as we say, going global. This typically means obtaining a second residency in the US and Europe. We also work with wealth management for people who are interested in investing in the United States, and offer a number of services around supporting families as they make the decision and then actually transition and move to a new country like the United States. This can be around professional development. It can be around education, healthcare, retirement, or even obviously wealth and tax. Before we jump in, I do need to do a little bit of housekeeping. So if you have questions, you'll see that there's a QA button in your Zoom software. Feel free to use your questions there. We'll take a look at them. I'll be working those into the conversation, and we can also save some time at the end. We also will be recording this event, and we'll make that available to everyone who's registered so that you can share it with a friend, or if you like, come back and see a section again. And again, since LCR Capital is in the investments industry, I do need to read the mandatory disclaimer. This marketing presentation and event does not constitute an offer to sell securities. LCR does manage private equity funds but does not offer funds related to art or art investment. If you're interested in seeing LCR product investment documents related to moving to the United States, we ask you to contact us directly so we can confirm that you are an accredited investor or the equivalent in your market. We can also then focus our conversation on you as an individual and your family needs. So thank you, and welcome everyone to this podcast about how art and the art world can support a global lifestyle. Many of our clients are exploring moving to the US or Europe, and we recognize that this is a big decision. This Worldview series, in general, looks at helping people make that decision and giving them the information and the interesting conversations that can make them feel more comfortable as they choose to move, for example, to the United States. So, Joey, I see you've been in the art world for a number of years. You've worked across galleries, museums, including even with the White House, bringing contemporary art into public policy, which must have been amazing. Can you take a quick minute, just try to summarize this background? I know that's always tricky. And also a little bit of what led you to join the Cultivist.
Sure. Okay. I will try to summarize my pathway, but I think the best thing to say is I've always been very passionate about art and what art can bring to the world, right? So I think artists have a way of expressing themselves in really global ways. They can talk about hard topics, express everything from sadness to politics to beauty, life. And so every aspect of my career has really been led through the desire to support artists. And I think you rightly pointed to the White House, because the ways that you could do that is artists can have conversations about public policies in ways that feel approachable. It doesn't hit anyone over the head with, okay, this is what criminal justice reform is. This is what the climate crisis is. It actually just opens up doors to come in on your terms as a viewer, as a consumer, as a collector. And that I think is a really beautiful thing. And so what attracted me to the Cultivist now 9 years ago was this idea that we were going to have a global arts club that created access, education through the entire ecosystem of art, not just blue chip like Sotheby's auction art, but also artists that are on the emerging side. And what does a global, and I'm sorry, LCR has a lot of experience with this. What is a global anything? What does that really mean? So to be able to explore that with the Cultivists through art and artists with a qualified group of very curious, passionate people who travel a lot, it was very exciting to me. And at the time, it was an entirely new model.
Excellent. I think we will cover quite a lot of what you just talked to. Probably not as much on the policy side, but it is really interesting to think about how art can give a different avenue to such dry subjects as government policy. Obviously, we work with a lot of government programs, so we do talk about that quite a bit here. But what I'd like to do today is start at the very top level. We have a number of people that might just be considering moving to the US or moving to Europe. And this is how can art provide maybe a backbone or a bit of structure towards a big move like that. This is like joining the art world. If we start up there and the benefits to people on why they should, then we can talk a little bit about the specifics. You guys with the Cultivist are quite active in specific events and access, as you mentioned, and bringing people together around events. And then last, because we are LCR Capital and we work in the investment world, I do want to spend a bit of time talking about art as an investment. And this gets into literally art can be an alternative investment asset. And we work with a lot of alternative investment assets. And also, I should say, we tend to like the ones that have an additional benefit beyond the monetary. And of course, art by definition is all about the benefit beyond the monetary. Jumping in. Art unlocks life, the lifestyle and benefits of acting on your interest in art. Let's just talk about the community. You've obviously been in this business for quite a while, and it's something you've known forever. Take a step back. Think about someone who's just joining the community. Are there any stories, or what do you think drives people who come in and that maybe they've been active locally in Mexico City, and now they're thinking, wow, I would like to take this and be attending events in London or New York? What pops up?
So I actually can take this very far back because most people assume I've spent 2 decades working in the art world plus, and many people assume that I came from the art world and art was always around me, which is actually not the case. My family's from South America, so I'm first generation, and we weren't talking about art in the same ways. But it created, when we first moved to New York, my father would take me to the MoMA as an outing, and we would just look at one work. And as a child, I didn't have the patience to sit and look at one work for an hour. And I didn't realize until later in life, the reason why we would look at just one work for an hour is because that's all that my father had time to research. And he wanted to give me an educational experience. And when we think through history, what are the things that last, that tell the stories of a culture, of a people? It's art and it's architecture. So if you are in a new place, or if you're curious to see what a city or a country or a people really stand for, what better way than to look through their art? Now, I know that can get sticky in some places, but overall, when you come to New York City, as an example, there is art everywhere. In Paris, there is art everywhere. In Mexico City, not only are you looking at great contemporary art, but a whole history of indigenous, the Huichol, like huge histories that has stood up through time and will stand up through time beyond like banks and Starbucks, which are great, but it's not what tells a story. It's not what anybody can walk into a museum. They're very often free, or they have free days, and just see and observe and maybe find something that they connect to, even if they're not in their home, but they'll find an artist that is from wherever they are from. So I actually think it creates a platform for people to connect just through an object, which is quite powerful.
I'm just going to take a second here and stop sharing the intro screen so people can see us a little bit better. It's interesting that story you said about your father taking you to the MoMA and looking at a single piece, and also that he had taken the time to research a piece so you could have a conversation about it. I suppose one of the top level benefits of art is this concept of having learning and education and as part of your life for your whole life, not just while you're in school or as a child.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's not always accessible to everyone. Arts education, particularly in the United States, is something that it's the first one to lose funding. But the role of the galleries and institutions and art organizations, they find ways to give the public access to art. And it's pretty incredible. I always will give my father a lot of credit for that moment.
Yeah, I do know that when we're traveling, we also bring the kids through and try to work a museum into our day.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be intimidating, right? Because at the end of the day, fine, I have 2 decades of experience. So people, particularly our clients, are always very curious, like what my read is on an art. But the truth of the matter is, you all have eyes, everyone can see, and you're entitled to have your own opinion about it and find value or meaning wherever you find value and meaning. And that's something people forget about the art world. There's actually not a rule to how a work is read, which also makes it able to have conversations across cultures, across languages, across economic, education, like all of these things can be tackled within one work of art. So it's actually, I think it's very inspiring and beautiful.
So I was listening to a podcast with a gallery owner, and yeah, he said that families start collecting art usually about the time that their children go off to university, but before the family buys a family sports car. And is it accurate to say that when you think about the events you're attending and that the community is in their 40s and 50s, does it really depend on the event in terms of how the age and style of the audience?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, because one of the things that the Cultivist is very good at is we actually have a broad spectrum. So it's not as much tied to age as it is curiosity. So I think we're seeing a lot of people of different means and different backgrounds across ages. Certainly, there's a huge pool of 30-somethings that are curious and they're starting to get very interested in the art world, and they're not sure about how to enter. So the Cultivist provides a wonderful access point for that. But then, yes, there's established collectors that are sitting on major museum boards that also participate. That, I think, is the beauty of the art world. It can be quite mixed. Like, artists who are curious and in their early 20s to people who have a long history. In terms of collecting, I think what the gallerist said is pretty right. That's about the time you start getting comfortable with spending the cash to collect art. Collecting means different things, and if you're curious enough, there's different price points too.
So how about how global it is? So we work with a lot of families that are coming out of emerging markets or developing markets. This can be the markets in Latin America, it can be India, Brazil, Asia. Are you finding the community is broadening? I know that when China was riding quite high, there was a lot of activity there, but actually now India is a market which is one of the strongest in the world. Are you seeing more activity in terms of engaging people from the Indian market?
Yes and no, because I think the reality is that not as many people discuss as there's been artists from all over forever. So India has always been part of the art world and has always made great contributions. But I think what you're asking is like, where are we seeing the money come from in terms of the art market? And it's predominantly the United States, followed by Europe. So while the migration and diaspora from places like Latin America, India are certainly on the rise, a lot of the exchange and the commerce is still happening in the US. And of course, Asia and China is really making a huge, they're constantly like this with the US in terms of the art market. Yes and no. I anticipate, particularly with South America, that is going to shift in a positive way. I do forecast some trends with more of the market coming from South America over time.
And with a degree of family background to drive that.
Just throwing that in there. And also, like, we
Well,
talked about this a little bit too, right? Like how much the art world is opening up and trying to be more accessible to more communities and more languages even.
So one of the premises when we went out and we're talking about this podcast is, I know I personally moved to the UK when I was starting a digital agency there, and I lived in London for 10 years. And it was interesting that while my work brought me to the UK, quite quickly you find yourself looking for social communities and activities outside of your work. And I can say from personal experience that where I connected, obviously I have great work friends from that time, but actually some of the people that have become true lifelong friends came through a passion for sailing and going down to the Solent and doing that. Do that. We have people on this podcast who are thinking, I'm about to, say, be approved for my conditional green card. I've made my investment, and I'm now about to pick up and move to somewhere in the US. It might be California, it might be Dallas, it might be New York. How can the art world provide that sense of community?
Absolutely. I think when you get involved, whether it's something like the Cultivist, which is an inherent sense of community, or an institution like a museum, by joining as a member on any level, when you start going to events, you will start seeing the same people. And you already know there's a shared interest, right? And generally, the art world can be quite friendly, even though we have somewhat of a bad reputation, but we are great people and we travel, and you'll find like a lot of like-mindedness within the art world. And I think going to events, like there's such a commonality, right? You mentioned it with sailing. The same thing happens in the art world. Even some of my greatest friends first moving here, it came through art. And the Guggenheim in particular, I joined a patrons group, and I am still friends with many of those people. And we've continued to support arts and artists through that community. It's great.
So as you learn more, as you do more, as you engage more, you meet people. So there is no secret handshake or keyword that you have to use in order to be on the inside.
I don't think so. I really don't. I think it's just participating and showing up. Yeah, really it is. And we know this is particular in the United States. The tax dollars don't support the arts, right? So it really is up to individuals. So the individuals that choose to support institutions or join global arts clubs like the Cultivist, that's making impact. And that's a real service to the arts world, and that is recognized and that is appreciated. And you are with people who share that passion, and or in the very least they're mostly traveling, and they're mostly, so there will be a lot of commonality, I think.
So let's talk about the events and the kinds of events and the kinds of people and the things that you can do. Obviously, I think everyone's familiar with the Blockbuster exhibition openings, and I imagine everyone has walked by the galleries and thought about, can I go in and look around and have a conversation? What do you find is the best entry point for people who are interested in making this more a bigger part of their life? Is it sort of the exhibitions, in your opinion, or is it putting your email into a gallery's website and getting invited to the opening on a Thursday night?
So this is a great question, and I'm actually going to give a shameless plug here, John, because this is exactly the reason why we started the Cultivist, right? Because yes, you can walk into a gallery, and yes, you can join a patrons group for a museum. And I think all of those things are great. But one of the things we notice on the Cultivist side is that, fine, you can go, and I'll just use New York as the example because that's where I am currently. On Thursday nights, the start of the month is usually when all the galleries open, and you can be in Chelsea and you walk around, and it's free and open to the public, and people are pouring out into the streets, and it's a motley crew of people that, like I said, from major museum collectors to the artists that are up and coming, and it's really fabulous. But if you don't know anybody and you don't know the artist, you can walk in and feel a little intimidated. So what the Cultivist set out to do was break down some of those barriers and create global events. We do 17 a month, and it's everything from artist studio visits to museum tours while the museum is closed to the public. So we could actually make those connections. So we actually introduce all of our members through that, because it could be hard to figure out what the right way is. But to move off what the Cultivist, like, and how it was founded, and just to answer your question, yes, galleries are a great way to do it, but I can't say it's always the most inviting way. But yes, getting on a gallery list and knowing the openings or following museums. Like you can, on a very low level, join a museum that you love, that you've gone to as a patron program, and just start attending, and you'll get little openings here and there. But it is what you discuss is very much the reason why the Cultivist started.
And how much would you say or recommend when you're talking with members, finding a genre or a medium or a type of art that connects with you, and then that becomes your point of learning, and then as you learn, your level of sophistication increases, then of course with that comes the comfort of having conversations about that genre. Is that sort of like a classic that you recommend to folks?
Yes, with the caveat that I think you could never be wrong about your opinions. Really, you cannot. And that is the greatest, I think, that's the greatest piece of the art world that's not ever communicated. Is like, it shouldn't be intimidating. If you have eyes or ears or touch, you can participate, and maybe not without any of those things. But I do think that education around art is important. And what we found is through the Cultivist, or like what we try to prioritize, is you don't have to like every exhibition, every artist that we put on our program. But as we go through this art journey, this joyride through art together, are you learning why you don't like it? Are you learning what you do? And how are you building up the confidence in yourself as a collector, as a viewer, as an enthusiast, to talk about art and just reconcile for yourself? I don't like this. Okay, why? And by the end of, we actually have a huge retention, but like our members learn through this process, which is really, that's the best thing that you can take away from the art world and being curious. Is
Yeah. And then that in turn actually fuels personal development, because you're learning about something new. You're, as I was saying earlier, building that lifelong belief in learning, and access, and of course the community that comes with it. So I know when I was actually in London, we built a website for an entrepreneur that came out of Getty Images, and it was focused on photography assets. This was quite a little while ago. It was probably 2001 or two. So it was the early days of those online sales. And one of the things when we were working through the strategy on that was, if an individual feels a connection to the artist, that's when you have the biggest benefit on both sides. The artist actually has the benefit of feeling like they've connected with a fan or a collector or someone who's interested. Obviously, they're thrilled to have someone who's interested in what they're producing. And equally for the viewer or for the collector, you have the sense of, I've connected with this specific artist. I know a bit of the backstory. Perhaps I've seen the studio. I think that as part of that, you guys do actually provide access, or you do events around specific artists and studios and things like that.
We do. So again, like thinking through the entire, what I'll call ecosystem of art, there's the Met Museum, and then there's emerging artists or established artists in their studios. And generally we see the end, I hate to refer to it this way, but the end product, right? We see the finished artwork, but we don't get a lot of access to the process. So one of the things the Cultivist likes to do is put studio visits on our programming, because that is so special. That is truly, I hate to say it this way, but a money can't buy experience, right? Getting to be in the artist studio where they're making, and then you see them months before they ship their works off to XYZ museum, and then you go into the museum and you go, oh gosh, I got to see that when it was still in the studio. And you can start to build relationships. And again, it goes back to that community aspect. Yes, it's very special, and it's why it's important for us in terms of our programming to make sure that the artist is not lost in that conversation either, and those meaningful connections stay intact. So thank you for that question. It's a good one.
And so you have obviously the large exhibitions, you have gallery events. Obviously, galleries are opened during the day, which is obviously much lower traffic. You have these private artist interactions. How about these giant art fairs? Obviously, we've all heard about Art Basel or the Frieze or Art Paris. How these are bringing together huge conventions of people, and I imagine it must be. Is there a way to access that as a mere mortal?
Yes, absolutely. So there's a number of ways to access it. The way that you get the greatest access is if you're collecting from the galleries that are participating in in the fairs on a fairly significant scale. But the other thing is, if you're just curious, and let's again say you're not a member of the Cultivist because we support through access, a lot of these major fairs have tickets online that you could buy just to go. Are some of those moments a little intimidating? If it's your first foray into the art world? Absolutely. It's almost like being at a car show, but with art and hundreds of people. Art Basel Miami Beach, I think, sees like 80,000 people on top of the people already living in Miami, just going to Art Basel, Miami Beach. And that's one of the fairs. But then all the auxiliary fairs like Scope and Nada and Untitled, those also happen during the week. It's a great time if you're like living in a city, like for example Bogota has Artbo, Mexico City has Sonamaco. Those cities really activate in that time, so the museums do the best shows. So if you're not yet collecting but you're curious, yeah, just get a ticket online. You can do that. Most people don't realize it. And again, I'm always cautious about how meaningful those experiences can be, but you can often just ask questions of the galleries. And it's an awesome way to see what's happening globally, because you'll get galleries from Japan, you'll get galleries from India, you'll get galleries from Mexico, from Chile, from New York, LA, in one place. It's amazing. Like, it's actually a very cool thing. It's very overwhelming, but that's great.
And it also comes back to, as much as we all do a lot online and we use our email and our social media and we do our research, connecting face to face is hugely powerful. And these become reasons. And then, of course, as you build relationships, then the fact that the fair is happening and the fact that you'll be at the fair allows you to have dinner or do whatever to connect with people. And that in turn brings a lot of benefits back. You talked about being a collector. Let's shift to thinking about art as an investment. So obviously the first question that I imagine people must have, we can talk about how has art performed in general, but I have to ask, what is the amount that people need to invest, if you like? Like, I would imagine with an emerging artist, you could probably start to build a relationship by buying 4 pieces at $200 each. I don't know. And again, I'm not in that world, but I'd love to hear your take.
The truth is you can be a collector at any level. So yes, John, you're absolutely right. You can start with prints. You can start with an extremely emerging artist that's selling under $500 and collect that way. Absolutely. That's something a lot of people in the art world or art world curious do not realize. You actually do not have to be buying Picassos to get in on this game. Or support artists. But I get this question all the time. It's the number one question I get is, what artist should I invest in? And I know so little of like financial markets, but I can compare it to this. Okay, what are you trying to do? Are you really trying to support an artist? Are you trying to make a return? If you really think through investment. So it's okay. Rembrandt is like your bonds, right? If you really just want to make money, buy a Rembrandt, but that's not because it's going to go up. It's never going to go down, but you're not going to you spent a lot to get it. But what you pointed out, John, which I think is the right way for me personally, and the way that I've done it, is to look at the emerging artists, which you call high risk, right? Because you don't know, you're playing a gamble. There are tactile things that you can look for in a CV, in exhibitions, that can give you a good indicator, just like any portfolio, of how it's going to perform over time. That is actually a thing. No one talks about it, but it's a thing. And
those kind of research tools, and is that based on past sales at auction so that the artist would have to be at that level? Or are there things like audience statistics, gallery presences, things like that?
So I can give you 2 answers to that. One is, and if it's helpful to put these in the chat later, there's 2 websites where you can check these things out. One is called Price and the other one's called Art Facts. And one is looking at auction results and others looking at exhibitions, because it's not, a lot of the emerging artists are not going to have any information on the secondary market. They're emerging. No one's like, they don't even have anyone demanding their work, let alone a place in the secondary market for it. So if it's truly emerging, one of the things to look at is how often are they exhibiting? What museums are they exhibiting at? What galleries are they showing at? Have they received a lot of grants from outside of organizations? What school did they go to? Is it RISD? Is it Yale? Is it Hunter? Is it the Courtaulds? Is it St. Martin's? Like, where have they gone? What does their community look like? And actually, so there are identifiers out there. And then for mid-tier, yes, you could start looking at auction prices and make a guess. But what anyone should really say is, if you love it, it's never going to go down in value.
Right, of course.
So anything anyone ever buys, you should love it, particularly if it's on the emerging market side, because then it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
If it doesn't.
And just starting on that side of it, coming in from identifying a new artist that you like, that you connect with, and the genre, and then buying them and collecting it and putting it on your wall. Some of the biggest names in the historical art world, like Peggy Guggenheim, and where I grew up, well, Isabella Gardner in Boston, or where I grew up was a Theodate Pope Riddle, which is a little colonial museum in the middle of Connecticut called the Hillstead. She happened to go to Europe in the 1800s and discover Impressionists. She loved them. She put them on her wall. They are now worth huge amounts of money. And she wasn't spending huge amounts of money. I think she was spending significant money for the time, but not what obviously they're worth today. So that's still a thing. Like, people are still creating collections around that, identifying something they love, a genre they love, and buying it.
Absolutely. And only because you mentioned Peggy Guggenheim, and she has this fantastic book. It's an autobiography called Confessions of an Art Addict, where she talks about one of her she has 7 art regrets. And one of them is, obviously, she was a significant patron of Jackson Pollock, who's a modern master, and his works are selling for extraordinary amounts of money. He would give her works as a thank you for supporting him with some studio funds. And she was like, I gave so many away to everybody from my staff, because I didn't think that they were going to be worth anything. I didn't think they were great works, but I really loved him as an artist. And obviously I regret that, because I would have had so many more Pollocks that I wound up with. And so like this, but it does speak to something interesting too, because she didn't care about the work. She cared about the artist. Right. And obviously she had some left, but she does talk about that. And I always loved that anecdote. Like, yes, it is something, if you take the risk and you support an artist in that way, not only does it psychologically support the artist, but yeah, you just don't know if you have the next Jackson Pollock.
That's, and obviously the same thing happens in equity markets, where you discover a company in the early days, but so taking that analogy, there's the other end of the world, which is mutual funds and ETFs and things like this in the equities world. In the art world, you're actually seeing that happen as well. You're seeing funds like, was it
Masterworks, right?
Masterworks? Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And do you see a lot of growth in that? Are you seeing that for both the artists, or I guess at that point, you're only dealing with your Rembrandts, right? You're only dealing with the top tier of works. And so then it becomes more the business of art rather than the passion. Is that accurate?
Yeah. And I don't want to say anything negative about Masterworks. I don't fully understand the inner workings of it, but it is about the metrics, and it's about ownership, and like, nobody gets 1/4 of a very rare car. Like, why would you do it with, it's not the same thing. Like, one of the reasons why the art market has gotten so intense is because of the reality that, unlike a car or a watch, where there's a lot of exclusive collectibles in those fashions, or even sneakers, like, people collect a myriad of things. Art, there's just one. So like, you would be the only person in the world that has this Marilyn from Andy Warhol. And that is definitely a motivator for some people who are buying at that level. I don't understand, outside of the financial, what people actually get by owning 1/4 of a Banksy. It doesn't do anything for the artist. It doesn't do anything for your personal credibility within the art world. It doesn't do anything with the galleries. It is really a speculative thing. Of course,
Or it's just a pure financial investment. I think Masterworks is saying that they have 800 million of assets under management. It's become a huge sector.
right.
But I guess, and I was also, I was looking in the Grove Gallery, which I guess is in London. They're all saying that they'll purchase the piece, box it, and store it in a temperature controlled environment. So literally it's like buying gold and leaving it in a safe somewhere and never even bringing it home.
And then, but historically, like most collectors, Leon Black, when he bought one of the Screams, he put it in a museum so the world could enjoy it. I don't, that to me is, and again, everybody has different thoughts on this, but that's not how art should function, right? The artist didn't make it so it would sit in a temperature controlled storage. Artists hate that. Sometimes it has to happen, but if there's a world where instead of putting all those works in storage, maybe everybody who's buying into that equity or that asset can say, why don't we have them on display so at least the public can enjoy them?
And you do hear those stories as well, where someone buys a piece that is in high demand, your bank sees, what have you, and then it's actually never in their own house because the museums are asking for it. And I suppose that there is some benefit to that in terms of the social currency of saying, I own a piece that's currently on display in Paris and it's moving to Dubai. We're really excited about that. Yeah, at that level. And obviously that's the top level of both the collector and engaging in that because you're buying pieces that are in huge demand and then being demanded by the museums.
And at all levels too. Certainly mid-tier artists have collectors that buy their work and then they agree to loan them to a museum exhibition and your name is on the wall. You get credited courtesy of, and I found in my experience, collectors who do wind up with works that are in an institution or a group show because they loan the work, not only does it increase the provenance of the work, so the value starts to go up. So it's a really smart thing. It's much smarter than sticking it in storage. So if you ever have a work and an artist asks to put it in a museum exhibition, you absolutely should loan it out because it increases the provenance. And then two, people feel so proud of that, like they've participated in a larger way that goes beyond money. So there's such an emotional reward that comes on top of it. Yeah, so it's a win if you do it that way and if you're able to do it that way.
So coming back to the different types and the levels of investing, I can't help but come back to the kind of analogy to equities. You can find a small tech firm that's got an interesting idea, and that's your emerging artist, and you may get your astronomical venture capital 1000x return.
Right.
Or this kind of investment grade art. So there's enough liquidity in the market, meaning that pieces move and buy and sell enough that there's a degree of confidence in that. Again, going back, some of these galleries I was mentioning, they're proposing or they're saying they can have 8 to 12% return. Now, we all know in financial services art, you can't promise returns, but for that kind of mid or top tier, is that the kind of returns people have gotten historically?
So it's okay. This is a really great question, John, because I'm going to give you the very honest answer. Okay. So there's the financial aspects of it where, yes, you could flip a work and make that 10 to 12. Some people have made 50. I have a work I bought for 2,500 that is now in the very high six figures. Okay. I own that. I'm never selling it, but things happen. What happens though, when you get access to works from galleries or artists, and then you start to just flip them because maybe the artists, you earn what's called a very bad reputation in the art world, and you will not get access to future works. You will be blacklisted. Artists will say, I don't want my work collected by X because they're going to flip it. And that's not, so it actually hurts you overall if you're looking at it from that perspective. Most people only really sell their art, like what's death, divorce, taxes, it's the same things. And the right way to do it, really the appropriate way to do it, is if you do buy a work and you need to sell it for whatever reason, you are first meant to offer it back to the gallery before you put it on the secondary market. That is the decorum, and it doesn't do anybody any favors to just earn the reputation of earning 8 to 10% on your art world. It doesn't, like, it's like an unregulated, unspoken thing, but the numbers, as you say, are accurate. It's the spirit that doesn't quite translate.
Interesting, because in some ways, I would imagine if an artist is emerging and people then sell that art and buy it and it shows up in the secondary market, that must help them build their
Well,
reputation.
yes and no, right? So the secondary market, the artist doesn't get any of that money. So I buy a work for $1,000, the artist gets 500 traditionally, and the gallery will get the other 500. So they usually split it 50-50 with the gallery. I then go on to sell that at an auction for 600,000. The artist still only has that $500.
Mm.
So there's actually been, like, Ed Ruscha being one of them, gets very upset when his works go up on the market. Some organizations are working to correct that. And I think in the UK, it's slightly different. They have a little bit more to protect the artists in terms of royalties. So no, artists don't like it. What could happen, though, is that their market shifts, and then overall it does
Their
help
new
in some
works would
way.
then be sold at a higher price point, but
Right.
yeah.
But if most of the works are getting sold on secondary market, maybe the artist is either dead or aging and not making as much work, they don't really see that. So who does it benefit? Do artists like that? Yeah, yes and no.
Really interesting. As
Yeah.
an economist, of course, I started to dig into the mechanics behind it. So I have to also, having worked in digital for years since 1995, and that economics background, I have to go to NFTs for a second. I suppose that really represents the extreme end of art as this weird financial commodity. And the Bored Ape Art Yacht Club and all of these things, obviously it got so many headlines and they've come down in value as rapidly as they went up in value. How do you, as a more part of the traditional art world, how have you all seen this NFT? I mean, I'll just jump in one more second. A good friend has had a product in technology at Sotheby's, and when that happened, they had a whole new business open up for them that they did not plan. And obviously they could build the technology to run NFT auctions, and they did. And it was a whole new revenue stream that came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But how do you guys feel about the kind of NFT concept? And
Yeah. And again, I'm here, party of one, speaking about some general sentiments around NFTs. So, one, I see them as a medium that an artist can use to create works. The speculation around it, anybody who is on the more traditional side just could smell it for what it was. And those people who participated in it knew that it could be potentially a quick money grab. So hooray to everybody who just got their money. Like, good for you. But it actually damaged so many artists in a way. And I think it never really, because of that moment, it didn't do what it actually could have done. And what we could have really spoke about was the blockchain. The NFT in and of itself is a medium, but the blockchain and the blockchain technology could really be protective. We're talking about artist royalties and how they
I was
get
going to say, as soon as there
compensated.
was
So
a transaction, yeah,
those things, like that minting, that paper, whatever, that code is great. That's a great advancement for the art world. But we didn't talk about that, right? We talked about the commerce of it. And I hope that there's a world where the blockchain gets implemented in a way, or the NFT is a record of the object, and we can actually work through that so we can protect the seller in terms of provenance and authenticity, and we can protect the artist in terms of future sales and, like, what I'll call royalties. It's not something that exists in the art world, but we'll call them, for the sake of it, royalties. For the
It's interesting, when you go back to those historical examples, a lot of the effort of an Isabella Gardner was documenting the pieces. Where did I first see it? How did I know the artist? When did I buy it? And I think that probably had a lot to do with the passion. This was a hobby, a lifestyle that they were keen on, and then that documentation became part of it. Yeah, and now that you're speaking about the use of blockchain or distributed records, that is an obvious route for kind of continuing that documentation and bringing it to a modern world.
Yeah, and those were the conversations nobody was having around NFTs. So
Yeah,
it doesn't mean
and
it's still.
it never became another income source, because like as a verified photo or a best photo of a physical piece, because I thought there was one concept that artists would be able to see added revenue from their work by selling the certified tokens.
And some artists did. Some artists got in and got out, and good for them. I love it. Beeple he did free artwork for years, covers of CDs, where he just gave away work to different artists for album covers and things. And so when he first sold his NFT at like 68 million or something bananas, everybody was up in arms. It's, you know how much work he did for free? It's just like back pay. Let him get his money. It's back pay. Who cares?
So we've got one question here, which was around the kind of selling and the secondary market as well. Obviously, if you're collecting pieces, your tastes can change. What you're interested in buying and owning and putting on the wall at 30 can be very different from when you're 50. And so doesn't that drive a bit of, so the question is, does that open up the secondary market if that's your interest?
So yes, and I have two answers, so I'll answer as succinctly as I can. So yes, your tastes are going to change. It's inevitable. Even if you're an art connoisseur, taste will change. And there is a strategy to, I definitely know collectors who have bought early. Those artists have grown up. They've hit a certain price point in the market. The collector's taste simultaneously changes. So they will sell that early work, make their return so they can keep buying art in different ways. That happens. It's going to happen. And if your tastes have changed and you no longer want the work, and maybe it allows you to expand your art portfolio or your art collection in a different way, that's very normal. Again, it just comes down to protocol and decorum. The appropriate thing to do is either offer it to the artist or the gallery before you go to secondary market. That's the appropriate thing to do. I'm not saying it's the most financially rewarding thing to do.
I suppose these things we are people, and in people it comes down to communication, and so it depends a little bit on how you handle saying, I've decided that I want to move in from this genre to this genre, and so
Totally.
I'm looking to do this with my pieces, and right. And
absolutely. And that even happened for myself, where I started off one way and now I have a very clear vision as I've grown up. I'm like, okay, this is what my focus is. Focus is very important. The other thing I say is, if you're just newer on your art journey, I tell this to, I'm not an advisor, but unofficially, I have a lot of people ask me as a curator, and I always say, don't buy for 2 years. Just don't. Learn, look. Just resist the urge. Or if you're buying, buy at a very low level. Don't come in at 5, 6 figures, 4 figures. Don't. Just 2 years, look, learn, participate in other ways by supporting institutions, organizations. Exactly. That's a great one. And then think through, because you're going to learn a lot at the start. And it's a great opportunity to figure out. It's so easy to be like, oh, this artist is hot, I'm going to buy it. And then all of a sudden you're sitting with something you hate. You have to look at it. And you mentioned this a little bit. We touched on it quickly. It's a lot easier to buy than it is to sell.
Like everything in life, I think.
Regardless of the artist. Regardless of the artist.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, that's good. And of course, I guess also another, because there are people do have physical limitations on how much art they can hang. And you do, I think intrinsically, if you're passionate about the pieces, you don't want to see it in storage or know that it's just in storage. I suppose you also can gift. There is a big charity element to the art world, and it could be gifting to friend or family, but I guess it can also be straight up gifting out to charities, right?
Yeah, charities or institutions. Again, particularly in the United States, museums don't have unlimited budgets to purchase artwork. So very often a collector will donate a work after they've purchased it. And then there are tax benefits to that. And you get some cultural currency in your corner, get your name on the placard when the work comes up. There are a lot of rewards, again, financially, emotionally, culturally, if you're thinking through collecting that way, if you don't have the storage for it, or if you just know it'll help the artist and the institution is looking for that work. Totally.
Super interesting. Just to quickly summarize what we've gone through today, obviously great conversation, Joe. I really appreciate it. And always in a webinar like this, I find I learned so much about the business of the Cultivist. That also is super interesting. It comes much more to life when you're talking in person rather than looking through the website, although you guys have a great website.
Thank you.
Clearly, as people think about having a global lifestyle, a passion for art can provide that. There's events, and clearly there are groups of people that come together around specific artists, mediums, specific galleries, all those different angles. So that's quite interesting. Yeah, I think we talked through is it intimidating and how you get through that. And I think a big part of that is, as you said, showing up and learning and just care. I suppose if you're in and you care and you're asking questions that are from the heart or talking from the heart, then no one is going to push you out for that. That's a welcoming piece. And then in terms of the specific events, there's lots there and there's lots of ways to access. And of course, as an investment, my word, you've got the entire spectrum there as well, from stumbling across a tiny gallery in Brooklyn to attending Sotheby's and sort of thinking before you raise your paddle on a six-figure purchase.
Yeah. I mean,
all that can be yours.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's like, it can be yours at any level. And I think that's the beauty and the exciting part about the art world. It is global. There's a huge ecosystem in place that's open and available to everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for spending the time with us.
Thank you, John. This was super fun. Okay.
Great.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.